Well, thank everybody for coming, and I want to thank my colleagues from the House for joining us on this important bicameral and bipartisan effort. And I also want to recognize my partner in the Senate, Senator Gillibrand, who is right now presiding in the Senate. When the Iranian regime murdered a young woman named Neda on the streets of Tehran, the American people did take notice. Neda was murdered for exercising her basic human and political rights, but she was not alone. Over the last 2 years, the Iranian government has brutally clamped down, executing hundreds and jailing more for daring to express their views and practice their religious rights and exercise their basic freedoms. We know many of their names, like Hussein Ranagi Maleki, 25, was among the first and youngest bloggers to challenge the regime's policy of internet censorship. Today, Hussein languishes in the infamous Evin prison of Tehran with a 15-year sentence. And his case is increasingly dire because Hussein suffers from kidney disease. Navid Kajani, 23, is a student human rights activist who stood up for the rights of Baha'i members of his faith who simply wanted to study in university. The government has now mandated that all Baha'i students leave university, and Navid faces a 12-year prison sentence for simply saying that Baha'is should continue their studies. And Nasrin Sotoudeh, 47, is a lawyer and human rights activist and a mother of two. Her legal defense of human rights activists like Shireen Ebadi landed her own 11-year prison sentence. Hussein, Navid, and Nasrin are not household names today, but they will be soon. During the Cold War, individuals like Andrei Sakharov, Yuri Orlov, and Anatoly Sharansky became household names in America. We should reclaim that spirit with an international initiative to defend the rights of Iranian dissidents. Last month, the State Department released its 2010 report on human rights in Iran, concluding that security forces under the government's control committed acts of politically motivated violence, repression, including torture, beatings, and rape. Today, we're introducing the Iran Human Rights and Democracy Promotion Act in both the House and the Senate. Our legislation would make it the policy of the U.S. to deny the Iranian regime the ability to oppress the people of Iran, to fully support democratic activities inside Iran, and to help the Iranian people freely and safely with access to information. Our legislation would impose new sanctions on companies that empower the Iranian government's human rights violation, would force the administration to investigate the individual human rights abusers of Iran, like President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and to help create a comprehensive strategy to promote internet freedom and access to information inside Iran. We would also create a new special representative on human rights and democracy in Iran to coordinate U.S. funding on this issue. In our view, the United States should make the issue of human rights a fundamental pillar of our international diplomacy with regard to Iran. Iran's support for international terror and defiance of the UN Security Council are byproducts of the repression and the denial of the basic human rights of their people. In the darkest days of Soviet human rights abuse, the odds looked very long, but the dignity of individuals prevailed. And we should bring that same spirit to our dealings with Iran. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our lead author of the House legislation, Congressman from Illinois, Congressman Robert Dolan.
I want to thank you all for being here. And I certainly want to say that it's a great day that we're able to come together for the people of Iran. Certainly the protests that have gone on throughout the Arab world in the past few months have captivated our attention. And as the momentum of the democratic protest continues to build in the Middle East, we are compelled to confront the Iranian regime's willingness to brutally crack down on its own people. In 2009, shortly after the election that we believe was seriously flawed, there was outrage in Iran, and opposition and students protested in the streets. Those protests were met with brutal crackdowns of the Iranian government. We've spoken recently with Iranian students and dissidents who were part of those uprisings, and we know that we have to help them in every way possible. Representing the 10th District in Illinois, we also are home to the Baha'i faith, and we have a Baha'i temple there. why we co-sponsored and put together Resolution 134, talking about trying to protect the Baha'is over in Iran as well. Given Iran's role as the world's leading state sponsor of terror, it is both a strategic imperative and a moral necessity that the United States use its leadership to promote democracy and human rights in Iran. The Iranian regime and its pursuit of a nuclear weapon, I believe, is one of the greatest threats to our own national security and also the national security of some of our very dear allies. Iran has been a growing destabilizing force in many other areas as well. We know, and we must never lose sight of the fact of the growing influence that they have in Iraq and Afghanistan as a destabilizing force, the role that they play with Hezbollah and Hamas in Syria, whereas they have already killed over 500 people in the past 6 weeks in order to put down and crush protests that are going on in that country. Iran has sent certainly many of the Iranian Guard over there to help Syria put down those protests. And also in Egypt, we know that Iran and their leadership are growing and trying to influence what's going on in Egypt and their relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood. This legislation sends a critical signal to the pro-democracy opposition imprisoned inside Iran, and to tell them not to lose faith or courage. We must, in the United States Congress and the United States Senate, shine a light so we can continue to put pressure and that all Americans realize what this regime is doing inside their own country. True change, however, has to come from within, and the pressure needs to be ratcheted up. We're coming to that critical point, and opposition groups inside Iran can no longer be oppressed. This legislation supports the people in the streets of Iran. We need to provide signals to the opposition not to lose courage. The protest movement still exists. The desire for freedom is certainly there. This legislation promotes our values and our fundamental beliefs in human rights, and is particularly significant given the dangerous, brutal, and aggressive nature of the current regime. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague in the House for his remarks as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today to announce this very important and timely piece of legislation. I'd like to thank Senator Kirk, Senator Gillibrand. It's great to work with you both again on this issue that we care so much about. And I'd also like to thank my colleague, Congressman Dole, for spearheading this effort in the House. Together, I am confident that we will be able to move forward. And though we often focus on economic sanctions and various financial mechanisms to get at the Iranian regime's nuclear program, we must recognize that working to support human rights in Iran and around the world is also in the interest of the United States national security. This Iranian regime has proven that it will only act in its own self-interest. The regime is now at a crossroads. Cracks in Ahmadinejad's base of support have formed. The blue-collar workers who supported Ahmadinejad during the disputed 2009 election have splintered as unemployment skyrockets and subsidies disappear. Yet the turmoil in the Middle East has emboldened Iran. The regime continues to send weapons to Syria, through Syria to Hezbollah, continues to smuggle rockets to Hamas in Gaza, and given the uncertain fate of the Egyptian border, this will only continue. Iran's been meddling in the affairs of Bahrain, and U.S. intelligence has confirmed that Iran has been assisting Syria's violent repression of its people by providing both weapons and technology. Economic sanctions have prevented billions of dollars from bolstering this abhorrent regime, but it is not enough. The choices become clear. If we want to see meaningful reform come to Iran, we must empower the opposition to fight back against human rights abuses. And this legislation will allow us to ratchet up the pressure on those who perpetrate the most egregious human rights abuses. Just a few weeks ago, the State Department released its country report on human rights, which warns of the rapidly deteriorating human rights situation in Iran. Just some of the detailed abuses found in the report include the extrajudicial killings and unfair trials, arbitrary arrest and detainment, holding political prisoners, women's rights activists, student activists, and religious minorities. And a recent study by Freedom House ranks Iran last in free press. The number of executions, especially those without fair trial or any trial at all, has risen dramatically, with well over 100 taking place just in the past several months. This legislation will help crack down on the Iranian Revolutionary Guard leadership and its special Basij security force through travel bans, asset freezes, and financial sanctions. Going after these abusers will help cut off the IRGC's high-ranking officials' ability to transfer materials and weapons and money throughout the international banking system. The bill not only goes after those abusers, but it will also go after those who aid human rights abuses by providing technical or military assistance. And perhaps most importantly, we will help the opposition stand up by giving greater access to media and internet freedom and shedding a light on the abuses occurring in Iran by appointing a special representative for human rights abuses in Iran from the United States Department of State. It's time for this regime to be held accountable. The Iranian people deserve free and fair elections, civil rights, religious freedom, and women's rights. This regime is unyielding in its resolve. The United States, in partnership with our allies in the EU, who have also enacted tougher human rights sanctions and imposed sanctions on 32 Iranian officials, must continue to send a message to the world that we will no longer tolerate Iran's flagrant disregard for international law, whether it be a covert nuclear weapons program or the violent repression of its own people. I'm proud to co-sponsor the Iran Human Rights and Democracy Promotion Act of 2011 and look forward to working with my colleagues to send this very important bill to the President's desk.
Thank you. We'd like to thank the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies that also issued a report today outlining some of the tools of repression and the companies that provide those tools. And now to introduce some of the people we're talking about, we have a 3-minute video, 1 minute on each person. Roll tape.
Many of you remember when the Iranian regime murdered a young woman named Neda on the streets of Tehran. Neda was killed simply for protesting against the stolen election for president. She is not alone. Day after day, the dictators deny the people of Iran their basic human rights, women and children, who ask for the kind of freedoms we take for granted. Hussein Renagi Maleki, 25, was among the first and youngest bloggers to challenge the regime's internet censorship. Today, he is held in Iran's infamous Evin prison, serving a 15-year sentence. Hussein's case is increasingly dire because he suffers from kidney disease. Navid Kajani, 23, is a student human rights activist protesting the regime's decision to remove all students of the Baha'i faith from their university studies. A member of the largest and most persecuted religious minority in Iran, Navid faces a 12-year prison sentence, the longest term imposed on any Iranian human rights activist. Nasrin Sotoudeh, 47, is a lawyer, women's rights activist, and mother of 2. Her willingness to defend protesters, human rights activists, and children facing the death penalty landed her own 11-year prison sentence. And finally, Jafar Panahi, 52, is an award-winning film director who was banned from film for 20 years and sentenced to 6 years in prison for making films that the regime didn't like. Hussein, Jafar, Navid, and Nasrin are not household names today, but with your help, they will be soon. My office is launching the Iranian Dissident Awareness Program. Our goal is to put faces with names, to tell the stories of the persecuted, the dissidents, the political prisoners. Many of us remember the challenge we faced from the Soviet Union. Instead of ignoring Soviet human rights abuses, President Reagan made the issue a central point in American foreign policy. Soviet dissidents, many called refuseniks, became American household names. America defeated communism because we did not turn a blind eye to these human rights abuses. We had the conviction of our own convictions. And now you can be part of this movement too. Contact your congressmen and senators and urge them to join the Iranian Dissident Awareness Program and to co-sponsor the bipartisan Gillibrand Kirk Iran Human Rights and Democracy Promotion Act of 2011. And visit kirk.senate.gov or gillibrand.senate.gov to see what else you can do. Together, we Americans can advance our basic values of free speech, women's rights, and the dignity of each individual by speaking out for Hussein, Jafar, Navid, and Nasrin, the people of Iran, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Thank you for watching.
And we're joined by Karaj Kalambadi. Karaj, thank you for being here. And Karaj, has a younger sister, Fariba Kalambadi, who is one of the 7 Baha'i leaders that were arrested in the spring of 2008. She's currently held in Iran's Gosharat prison, sentenced to 20 years solely. And Raj, thank you for being here. Questions, comments? Anybody?
Senator, how hopeful you are that your initiative will turn into a law and become a policy of the United States government?
This bill will be rolled into a much larger bill on Iran policy that will be put forward by Senate and House leaders, I think in about 2 weeks' time. And so this is the human rights component of what will be a far larger and more bipartisan piece of legislation.
You have always been in the forefront of, fight against the human rights abuse in Iran while you were in the House or in the Senate today. We've been following your news all the time, actually. And don't you think that changing the attention from nuclear issue into human rights issue would help the Iranian people to overcome this regime?
I think so, and I think based on what happened with an obscure Anatoly Sharansky in an apartment in Moscow, who then, as you saw, became part of Time magazine, it's that example that we're seeking here for Hussein and Navid and Nasrin. I think they can become part of the American consciousness. And let me turn it over for my colleagues from the House to say similar things about shifting the focus.
Well, I think it's exactly right. The focus thus far has been on stopping the Iranian nuclear weapons program. This is complementary to that. The focus now on freedom and human rights and stopping these human rights abuses draws further attention to the actions that this regime has taken in so many areas. I think it is only helpful, and ultimately, by putting names to these faces, I think what we'll do is be able to generate additional support throughout the world, not just in the United States, but throughout the world, to help move forward, to bring more human rights and greater democracy to Iran. That's only going to help us in our other efforts as well.
Let me simply say that what's going on right now in Iran, the Green Movement and the opposition movement, if we can shine light not only on the human rights violations, but also provide support to this opposition movement, we're going to be able to have potentially regime change. If we look at the former Soviet Union, it was far more entrenched than certainly what's going on in Iran today. And if we can provide support through communication devices and other means, we're going to be able to hopefully affect that change and have a regime change which would probably have the most far-reaching implications for Iran's nuclear weapons program.
Anybody else? Thanks, everybody. Guys.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
You bet.
It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. Great.